Meeting of the committee will come back to order. I want to now recognize on the Republican side the last 5 minutes of their debate time on the pending matter. Mr. Barton.
And Mr. Gingrey for 2 minutes.
Mr. Gingrey for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I want to point out to my colleagues that the Rogers amendment to the motion is just that. Mr. Rogers did not suggest that this was a comprehensive Republican answer to H.R. 3200. This is just simply to amend the motion. Now, the motion is, 25 amendments that are going to be submitted to the Rules Committee for inclusion into H.R. 3200. And these suggestions, these amendments, it's kind of an en bloc in itself, 17 amendments based on what the President said, not only in his joint session of Congress address, an address to the nation, but also what he said on several occasions since then in regard to what he is for and what H.R. 3200 does not do. And one perfect example was, and this is a quote from his speech, reforming our medical malpractice laws can help bring down the cost of health care. So in the Rogers Amendment, we enact comprehensive medical liability reform. We give also liability protection to community health centers. That's not in H.R. 3200. The President goes on to say the reforms I'm proposing would not apply those to those who are here illegally. In fact, on one of the Sunday morning talk shows, he said there should be a verification mechanism in place. We do that for a whole range of existing social programs, and I think that's a pretty straightforward principle that will be met. So we make sure that's specified in the Rogers Amendment. It says require citizenship verification for Medicaid beneficiaries. So, Mr. Chairman and my colleagues, again, that's what we're trying to do. That's what Mike Rogers is trying to do with this amendment to respond to not only to the American people, that members on both sides of the aisle, of course, heard during the August recess, but also the things that the President has directly pledged. And so I strongly support the Rogers Amendment, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Scalise for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Barton. It's been said that there's a lot of misinformation out there about this debate on health care, and I would agree, but unfortunately I think a lot of that misinformation is coming from President Obama himself. And when you listen to his speech that he gave to the joint session just 2 weeks ago, there are a number of things that he said and continues to say out in the public that just don't mesh with the bills he supports. When he says he won't sign a bill that adds a dime to the deficit, the bill he supports, H.R. 3200, adds $239 billion to the deficit. That's CBO's numbers. When he says that he won't support any bill or his bill doesn't allow illegal aliens to get health care. The Congressional Budget Office sat right there at that table just about 2 months ago and said 8 million illegal aliens will have access to the government plan under the President's bill. And then just the other day, the President goes on one of the Sunday talk shows and he says that there is no tax on individuals. And you read page 167. Tax imposed. In the case of any individual who does not meet the requirements of subsection D at any time during the taxable year, there's hereby imposed a tax equal to 2.5%. CBO said this equates to a $29 billion tax on people without insurance, most of whom make less than $50,000 a year. It's right here in the bill. It's called a tax in the bill, and the President says this is not a tax. And so you can see that the American people are tired of having their intelligence insulted by these comments that just don't add up to the things that people are reading.
Gentlemen, yield to me for a question.
I'd be happy to.
I'm curious to know, this is an amendment being supported by the Republican side. If this amendment were adopted, would you vote for the legislation?
Well, and reclaiming my time, what we're trying to do is just make the bill mesh more with some of the things the President says. Clearly, there are lots of things in H.R. 3200 that we don't like. What we're just trying to do is let the bill...
The President and his supporters can do that. Now, you're not even for his bill, and even if you corrected it, the way you see it, you're still not going to be for his bill.
When reclaiming my time, H.R. 3400 is a bill that I support. Over 40 members of Congress signed on to this bill. Actually addresses the real problems in health care. I would ask if you would support us in this bill because it actually addresses the problems without the government getting involved in taking over health care. So I think we need to address the problems, but the American people want these issues dealt with in an honest way, and so far they've read the bills and it just doesn't mesh with what the president's saying out there, and so that has got to be reconciled if we're going to have an honest debate on this, and I'll yield back.
We want to reserve the last 1 minute for Mr. Rogers to close.
Okay, good. And then for our last 5 minutes, I want to recognize Mr. Green, but if he'd allow me to start, if you'd yield to me for 1 minute. Oh, you're not, did you want to speak on this amendment?
Oh, no, not on this amendment. I have one coming up.
Okay. Well, the chair recognizes himself. I think it's very clear that we ought to recognize what's happening here. On the Republican side of the aisle, they say this bill doesn't really reflect what the president wants, as if the president wasn't clear enough in supporting the bill that we passed out of our committee and that the other two committees have passed, and the bill that will be presented to the House. But the telling point is that even if we adopted what the Republicans say the president really means, they're still against it. So you have to wonder, what do they really want? And my answer to that question is not a system where every American is going to be helped. They don't really want to correct pre-existing conditions. They want to put people into a pool, a high-risk pool, and then have them get insurance, but just at a much higher amount. Well, what about these people who get in a pool at a higher amount, or what about the people who have to go out and buy insurance and they can't afford it because the insurance companies want to put them in this higher risk area? Well, I think what we ought to do is have real reform, and I think the president has been pretty clear what he wants, and we've tried to be pretty close to following what he has recommended to us. His idea, as he said in his campaign, and he said from the very beginning of this year, let's reform the health care system so we can hold down the costs of this system. We're not going to be able to keep a Medicare program if the costs are going up as rapidly as possible and we're going into more and more deficit spending. Let's reform Medicare costs by holding down health care costs overall. Let's get everybody covered. Let's help those who can't afford it be able to buy a policy. Let's make sure that if they're discriminated against because of a medical condition, that's stopped. And the way to do this is to get everybody covered. That's what spreads the risk out over the broadest population possible. I want to ask members on my side of the aisle, any further discussion on this amendment?
Mr. Chairman, not on your side of the aisle, but I'd like to make a comment if you have the time.
Well, I'll yield you a minute.
All right, it won't take that. I would encourage the chairman, based on what you just said, and I will stipulate, the Rogers Amendment is not in order under the agreement that you and I have. There are parts of it that are not germane to our committee's jurisdiction. So there are numerous reasons to not allow a vote. But based on what you just said, if you do allow a vote, every Republican will vote for it, and if enough of your members vote for it, it will be a vast improvement over the bill that came out of committee.
Well, a vast improvement that still doesn't get us the votes from the Republican side of the aisle.
No, I just said every Republican on this committee will vote for the Rogers Amendment today if you allow there to be a vote.
No, of course you will. Of course you'll vote for it. It's your interpretation of what you wished President Obama wanted. And if you voted for it,
well, it shows that we're
it's just a vast improvement. Then you could come in with a long list of real demands. You shouldn't pick on the insurance company. You shouldn't have government provide coverage to anybody who needs it, which of course makes me worry because Medicare is a publicly insured program and it's been one of the most successful we've ever had. So I just want to point out for people in the audience that I don't want to question people's motives, but this is being presented as if it's a Republican alternative, and it's not the Republican alternative. If it passed, the Republicans are still not ready to vote for this out of the House. It's just a step in their direction. Well, that's fine. We'd always looking for ways to bridge the differences, but it doesn't bridge our differences.
Well, it is substantive. It would address primary problems that the President has raised, and it does conform with what the President says he supports. It is a substantive,
well, it is substantive,
policy-oriented
but it's not reclaiming my time. It's not what we want. They continued the donut hole for Medicare. It's a 21% fee cut for Medicare physicians in 2010. On trying to deal with fighting waste, fraud, and abuse, we don't have anything in your bill that covers the enhanced penalties for entities that commit fraud and abuse, which we have in our bill. We have an enhanced program provider protections, including improved provider screening and new requirement for provider compliance. We have a lot of provisions to stop fraud and abuse. They're not in your bill. You substitute a permanent risk pool instead of eliminating the discrimination and that insurance companies use all the time to exclude people from coverage. I have to tell you, we just have huge differences. And you think you're representing the President, but I would submit that you're not representing the President. And I'm ready to vote for the President's bill. But if your proposal was put before us, I'm not ready to vote for it. So my time has expired.
Mr. Chairman.
You have 1 minute left.
To close, the author of the amendment, Mr. Rogers' omission.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The things that he talks about aren't in here are in here. Matter of fact, there's a 20% increase to seniors today in their prescription drug premiums. 20% in your bill. There are real problems with it. And here's the fundamental difference. My friend said that liberty, that government gives you liberty and makes you happy. I don't know what constitutional document you read, sir, that allows that to happen. All of the rights of the Constitution are given by the people of the United States. And here's the difference, the philosophical difference. The President said 30 million people don't have health care. 30 million, that was his number. That means 270 million people are covered on health insurance that they earned. They earned it because they got up and played by the rules and worked hard, and they earned it. And what my colleagues are suggesting is, in order to fix the 30 million problem, we're going to force 270 million people into some government-structured system of providing health care. That's what you're doing. You're going to punish the very people who helped make America great, earned their health care, and say, you're the bad guys. We're going to tax you. We're going to regulate you. We're going to change your plan because we're not smart enough to figure out how to fix the 30 million. And you know what? It's all in here. Insurance companies compete. It's in here. Rescind people who, rescission for insurance companies who do it without fraud. It's in here. It protects those people. Illegal immigrants, it protects those people. Pre-existing conditions, it's in here. It protects those people. Medical liability, it's in here. I think the thing that frustrates you all is that there is a free market solution. You're just not willing to hear it.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman's now going to withdraw his amendment. Mr. Rogers, will you withdraw your amendment?
Well, it's Mr. Rogers' amendment, but he said he would withdraw it, and I'd support him.
Well, before I do that, I would ask the chairman then on one last occasion, and I'm sure there's some agreement and there's some parliamentary procedure and there's some rule, but 270 million Americans are waiting for the answer on this. If you would give us that option, I would certainly be delighted if you'd do that. Otherwise, our only other options are to go to Rules Committee.
Well, I think we play by the rules in this country. And if you're lucky enough to be wealthy and have
insurance,
go
through the whole process
it isn't because you earned it.
Mr. Chairman, you haven't played by those rules.
What rules?
You set your own rules. 2-hour delay. We never had that before. You had to go to the clerk. It gets stamped. All that's new. And those are your rules. And that's, I think, why Americans are so upset.
The gentleman,
these are your rules,
the
not
gentleman,
normal standard operation procedure.
The gentleman will please keep his decorum. The amendment is not properly in order. I was led to understand that it would be withdrawn. If it's not going to be withdrawn, then I'll recognize
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Malone for a point of order.
Who has the, under the rules of the committee, who has the authority to withdraw the amendment? Can any member, or does it?
It's the author.
It is the author.
My understanding is always the author.
Mr. Chairman, I very, very reluctantly, given consultation with the ranking member, will withdraw this amendment. But I think it's a travesty that we don't allow the American people a voice in this process.
Well, you're not the only voice for the American people. Mr. Green, you have...
No, but amendments and votes are, Mr. Chairman.
Well, amendments that are in order under the rules will be considered by this committee at any time. We had a markup on the health bill. Where was your amendment then? Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk. It's entitled Green Amendment Number 2 to phase out the waiting period for Medicare disability benefits. And, Mr. Chairman, I will explain it and withdraw because the issue we have is that, and I joke, as Democrats, you'd think we didn't think about how much things cost, but this amendment has an $84 billion price tag, and we can't come up with the offsets for it on that level. But it's an issue I've been working on for many years, and that I think is important, particularly to the disabled in our country who are under 65. When Medicare was expanded in 1972 to include individuals with significant disabilities, Congress stipulated that people with disabilities must first receive Social Security disability insurance for 24 months before beginning Medicare eligibility, which is a three-step process. First, the Social Security Administration must make a determination, Social Security disability insurance approval. Second, individual with disabilities must wait 5 months before receiving Social Security disability benefits. Finally, after receiving the Social Security disability insurance benefits, individuals must wait 24 months before they receive Medicare. Currently, 1.8 million individuals are stuck in a 24-month waiting period. Of these individuals, 39% are uninsured, 13% will die before they endure the 2-year wait. Most individuals in the waiting period have been disabled who became disabled were, before their disability, working full-time jobs and paying into Medicare like other employed Americans. Unfortunately, many individuals stuck in the waiting period cannot afford to buy individual insurance because of their pre-existing conditions, or if they obtain this insurance, or if they can obtain it, it's far too expensive. Additionally, most cannot afford the COBRA premiums to maintain coverage from their former employer, because typically Social Security insurance disability benefits are relatively low. Therefore, nearly 40% of the individuals stuck in the 24-month waiting period are without health insurance coverage at some point during their wait for Medicare, and nearly 26% have no insurance during the entire period. This bill would allow some of these individuals to obtain a government subsidy to purchase insurance through the exchange. If they live through the 24-month waiting period, they can switch to Medicare. I sponsored the ending Medicare disability waiting period for 5 years, and each year we've been unable to move the bill because it is too expensive. I'm hoping this health reform bill would be our opportunity to finally phase out the waiting period. Unfortunately, last week the CBO told us the score of this amendment is $76 billion. I thought it was 84, which makes it even too difficult to include. And Mr. Chairman, it's frustrating that we can't deal with this because these folks are there. All of us deal with them in our congressional offices. That we have people who apply for Social Security disability, they receive it, and all of a sudden they'll call and say, "Wait a minute, I don't have insurance. I can't afford the COBRA from my employer on my disability premiums, disability insurance amount." So I respectfully withdraw the amendment, and I'm hopeful we can work together in the future to, over a period of years, eliminate that 24-month waiting period. And I also would like to thank Representative Terry and Representative Sutton for their continued support of H.R. 1708, the ending the Medicare disability waiting period, and our work on this issue. And I'll yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Ms. Christensen?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I did have an amendment on the comparative effectiveness research, which closely mirrors the bill Senator Baucus originally introduced in the 111th Congress and is in the current Senate language and enjoys broad support from the American Medical Association, the National Medical Association, AARP, and many, many more organizations, including over 100 patient advocacy organizations, many of which represent individuals with disabilities, and is supported by many members of this committee. It's also important, I think, to note that MedPAC had recommended an independent public-private institute, and that President Obama himself in his platform had said that he wanted an independent institute as well. The provisions that were included in the amendment also respond to issues the Congressional Black Caucus and many in the Tri-Caucus have been seeking to have addressed since the last Congress. We're very pleased that the committee has seen fit to include in the base bill research and subpopulations, but we who have been burned several times by reports coming from administrations and the Department of Health and Human Services before also really consider that the independence of the Institute is a critical part of comparative effectiveness research. I understand that jurisdictional problems have come into play, and so I'm going to withdraw the amendment, not because I'm withdrawing my support of it, but because we have been unable to resolve the points of concern and disagreement as of today.
Would the gentlelady yield?
In just a minute, but I want to work with Chairman Waxman to try to resolve the issues raised by the other committee and to ensure that the final language asserts the core principles of this amendment. Who asked for the...
Well, if I might ask you to yield to me, then I don't know who... Mr.
And then
Upton.
here. Should I yield to you, Mr.
Well,
Chairman, and
just-
he'll
yeah,
have his
just,
time, or...?
If you'll, just for a second, I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to do a number of very important things. We need to make sure this is done right. I want to pledge to work with you and make sure that we adequately address the needs of populations such as women, racial and ethnic minorities, and people with disabilities. Make sure the research entity has scientific independence. We have strong conflict of interest provisions. And none of us on either side of the aisle ever want to interfere with the doctor-patient relationship. So I commit to work with you to make sure we get this right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield
Would
to
the
you.
gentlelady yield? As the gentlelady knows, I was urging you to offer and to keep this amendment, and would hope that you would not withdraw it. When we left in July, this was an amendment that was at the desk, and the gentlelady knows if she, for whatever reason, may not have offered it, I was prepared to do so. I know, as I recall, I think Mr. Inslee was also a co-author, a very strong supporter. Lots of Republicans and Democrats were prepared to support this amendment. And I guess it was when we walked away that night at 8 or 9 o'clock, I thought all the amendments at the desk would be able to be offered no matter who, in fact, might have been the sponsor of the amendment. And the gentlelady knows that had you not offered the amendment, I was prepared to do so. So I'm a little, I don't know how we got into this process. There was an amendment that was made a couple weeks, I think, before we got to the end of July. We're prepared to discuss it, debate it. I helped work the votes. I thought that we had a pretty fair chance of getting it adopted, and I'm just a little more than befuddled as to why we're not being able to debate and include this as part of the process today. And I don't know if, Chairman Waxman, if you'd like to expand further on your statement, but a number of us in the minority thought if the amendments were there at the desk that they were in fact going to be in the queue for whatever day we came back, which is today.
Well, if the gentleman will yield to me, we want to make some changes, work out some changes on this amendment. We don't have the ability under the procedure for today to have second-degree amendments. We'd have to get unanimous consent. That would mean involving a lot of different people and outside groups to agree to something. I think it just makes more sense to put it aside, continue to work on it, and then go to the Rules Committee with the amendment and try to get it incorporated.
Okay. Okay.
Gentlelady withdraws her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I withdraw the amendment with the understanding that we'll continue to work to some resolution of it.
Thank you. Mr. Stupak.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have two amendments at the desk. First one I'd like to do is Stupak 011.
We do both of them in block, and then
I'll tell you what, the first one won't take very long. If we want to just go right into the next one, I can do that. If you want to put them together, fine.
Without objection.
Second one is Stupak 003.
Without objection, the two Stupak amendments will be considered together and considered as read. And gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the first one is Stupak 011. This is the Federal Employees Health Benefit Package. We've all been in Congress long enough to know that Americans want the same health care and choices as members of Congress and federal employees have. If you're constituents like mine, I'm sure you've heard an earful. You've received the phone calls, the emails, the faxes, requesting that Congress give them the same health benefits that we have. It's astounding to me that the health care reform proposal being debated before us does not include the option of allowing employers and employees to buy in the federal health benefit plan that's offered to all members of Congress, and why this is not part of the exchange. So we're sitting here today creating whole new system with a health commissioner that will basically has what I believe is some unlimited powers, that when one part of the solution could be easily solved by just allowing individuals to buy into the federal employees health benefit package. So let's give the American people another option in the public option and on the exchange, and same option most of us receive. And for clarification, I do not receive federal employees health benefit package. I've never taken it since I've been here. But our constituents think that we have some special program. Let's give them the same opportunity. We have a number of federal programs, including the federal employees health benefit package, provide quality, affordable health care for millions of Americans, over 4,000 in my congressional district alone. Now, I understand, Mr. Chairman, that based upon this, that this amendment would belong before the Government Reform Committee. Even though we drafted this back in July, we've been trying to work out, but there is a germaneness issue, so I would have to withdraw this amendment. So I will do so, but I'm going to offer it again at Rules Committee whenever we do take up H.R. 3200, because I think it is an option that employers and employees would probably like, and it might be an option that they could use underneath the exchange. So with your permission, I will withdraw that amendment.
Okay, the gentleman withdraws his amendment. Do you have the other amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The amendment is 003. For a number of years, myself and Mr. DeFazio have been trying to say that the insurance industry should not be exempt from antitrust laws. So what this amendment does is basically takes away the exemption that the insurance industry enjoys. The insurance industry is one of the last industries in America not subject to antitrust laws. The industry can collude to set rates, resulting in higher premiums and less competition. Because of the exemption, rate increases are not reviewed by the federal government. We're creating a federal government plan here, so therefore we should have a right to review it and make sure that not in violation of antitrust laws. One of the most effective actions we can take to lower health care costs is remove this antitrust exemption. My amendment would lift the antitrust exemption that's been enjoyed by the health insurance companies for the last 6 decades. This would create competition in the health insurance market and lower the overall cost of health insurance for consumers, as well as malpractice insurance for doctors. Given that increased regulation and enforcement of antitrust law was a key component to the health care platform President Obama spoke about during the campaign, I'd hope that members of this committee would allow this to be an option on the table for our consideration. Medical insurers are the only group not barred from getting together and setting rates. Common sense alone should dictate that this group, especially in a forum like today's markup, not be allowed to do this. Why shouldn't this very important and growing sector of our economy be held accountable to the same laws as everyone else in all the other industries? According to the American Medical Association, 94% of the insurance markets in the United States are now highly concentrated, and insurers are thriving in the anti-competitive marketplace, raking in enormous profits and paying out huge CEO salaries. In fact, if you take a look at the profits of the 10 of the largest publicly traded health insurance companies, from 2000 to 2007, their profits rose 428%. In 2007 alone, the CEOs at these companies collected a combined compensation of $118.6 million, or an average of $11.9 million each. That's 468 times more than the average American worker made in that same year. American families are struggling to pay their mortgage, the bills, and the medical expenses. Many are losing their health insurance altogether with the loss of their jobs. Yet the health insurance companies continue to thrive at the expense of families and businesses. My home state of Michigan, as of October 1st, the insurer of last resort has announced that their increases will be at a minimum of 22%, as high as 40% for policyholders. And basically the rate of inflation in this country is 0. How can you justify a 22, let alone a 40% increase in insurance premium? So what I'm simply saying is this amendment doesn't cost anything. Let's take away the antitrust exemption. Let's bring some competition to this industry. And I urge the adoption of this amendment. And I would yield to Mr. Barton if he's not there. I would yield to Mr. Dingle.
Mr. Stupak, we're trying to move along before the next vote's on the floor. So
all right. Mr. Deal, I think, had a comment.
Will the gentleman yield to me?
Mr. Deal.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding, and I concur in what he's attempting to do, and I look forward to working with him in legislation that would address this problem as a standalone bill, and I commend him for his efforts in this regard.
I know Mr. Barton wanted to speak on, but he must be out, so I have to yield back my time on this one.
Will the gentleman yield very quickly?
Can I yield to Mr. Gett?
Yes, do that for very quickly.
I just wanted to add my support for this. I think if we really want to get competition in the industry, we've got to we've got to stop this exemption from the antitrust laws. And I really want to commend the sponsor of this amendment, Mr. Stupak, who has worked tirelessly on this for many years, and yield back.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Welch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk that I intend to offer and withdraw.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the biggest challenges we face in healthcare is bending the cost curve. And whatever approach any of us advocate, if at the end of the day healthcare spending continues to rise at 2 times or 3 times the rate of inflation, 2 times or 3 times the rate of profit growth of our corporations and small businesses trying to pay premiums, it's a healthcare system that's going to collapse due to the application of the law of financial gravity. Healthcare is incredibly important to all of us, our citizens, our businesses, our economy. But when we have a healthcare system where we spend more as a percentage of our economy, 16, 17, 18%, yet have the highest number of people uninsured, we're spending more than we should be and getting less than we deserve. Now, we have in this legislation a number of things that are intended to try to start bringing the cost down, and they're important. And they include insurance reforms, medical loss ratio, prescription drug price negotiation, accountable care organizations where we're trying to encourage a new payment system rather than the fee-for-service system that encourages a volume of services, and by effectively encouraging a volume of services, that's what we get, all at great expense to our consumers, our payers, our small businesses. There are steps in this bill to start rewarding value and outcomes based on providing the care that people need when they need it, based on their medical condition. But at the end of the day, if the provisions that we have in this bill do not meet the challenge of bringing down the cost curve, and we continue at current rates, by the year 2035, it will be an additional $1 trillion annual expense to our economy above regular inflation. So this legislation would establish a fail-safe health growth commission, and it would be composed of 5 members appointed by the President, subject to advice and consent of the Senate, and their charge would be first to report on an annual basis to Congress about the growth rate in health care spending, specifically as to whether or not this legislation that we may pass will bring down that cost curve by 1.5 percentage points. As I mentioned, if we're successful in doing that, it's going to save very close to $1 trillion in health care and, in my view, result in better health care. Second, if by 2015 we have not succeeded, we as a country have not succeeded in bending the cost curve, this commission would be empowered to make specific recommendations, much like the base closing commission, to the Congress to recommend changes on how we should change the payment system and other measures that they could recommend so that the goal that we have of reducing that cost curve would actually be achieved. Congress would then have the responsibility on an up or down vote in the House and in the Senate, a vote of disapproval, to either accept or to reject the recommendations of the fail-safe commission. Now, the question is, why would one propose to do this? And let me be candid. You know, I do believe that we have both sides of the aisle that are really concerned about health care and understand mutually that if we're going to achieve universal access that I think all of us want, we have to be successful on cost containment. The road to universal access is through cost containment in better care. But too much of what has happened in the healthcare industry has been driven by the fee-for-service system that encourages volume, and that's what you get. And those of us in Congress who served, as I have, on a local hospital board, or are doctors, as some of our colleagues on this very committee are, and understand the practical pressures of meeting a bottom line, have to do it within the healthcare system as we have it now, which is, as I said, based on the fee-for-service system. Consequently, as much as we've been pushing reform, many have been pushing in this bill for increased payment to their providers. Understandable. But we've got to break that cycle. So, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your time.
Would the gentleman yield?
I will yield such time as I have remaining.
The gentleman's time has expired. If the gentleman would permit, we're anxious to finish off the markup before the vote.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just say briefly in 15 seconds that I'm just very much opposed to the BRAC process and the way that the BRAC process operates, because I think it takes away the jurisdiction of Congress, and I think that it is an extreme measure. I think the gentleman's purposes can be achieved without switching the responsibility, if you will, of the Congress and taking away our jurisdiction and essentially giving it to an independent commission. I don't think that's the way to go, and I just wanted to stress that.
The gentleman withdraws his amendment. Further recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Stupak?
More housekeeping. I still have to withdraw my amendment on the antitrust exemption. It's my understanding that it would not be germane to this committee. It would belong in judiciary. And I'd also note that Congresswoman Neguet and Mr. Conyers have introduced a similar bill that will run to the Rules Committee. Therefore, I will withdraw this amendment since it's not germane.
The amendment's withdrawn.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Braley?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we've been talking about the broad implications of health care reform, oftentimes we forget about some of those key frontline providers who do the tasks that are critical to patients in need all across the country and yet rarely receive a lot of discussion during this health care debate. This amendment deals with the essential contributions that are made by home health service employees and providers and making sure that they are properly reimbursed. We know that home health services are used by over 3.4 million Medicare beneficiaries annually. Most home health agencies in Iowa rely primarily on Medicare and Medicaid funding to cover operating expenses. They are not only a high-quality but cost-effective alternative to nursing home care for many people and bring significant savings to Medicare by reducing repeat hospitalizations. Today, less is spent on home health services than in 1997 overall and on a per-patient basis. At the same time, the quality of care has been improving through the use of specialized nurses, better focused therapy, and modern technologies. My amendment addresses a concern that home health cuts proposed in the health care bill would cause access problems throughout the country. Meanwhile, overall financial circumstances are even worse because of low Medicaid payments and the virtually non-existent commercial insurance payments in the home health industry. If home health agencies close down with these cuts, both patients and the Medicare budget will suffer greatly, particularly in rural states like Iowa. These cuts are more severe because hospital-based providers often are not available in the rural counties in my state. And then they would have to make difficult decisions on whether to continue to offer home health services at all. My amendment targets abuses noted by the GAO and MedPAC and cuts payments to many high-profit sectors while avoiding a payment rate crash for others, providing time to adjust to reduce payments rather than a drastic set of reductions immediately. The amendment also allows a MedPAC recommendation by moving a payment model toward more reforms instead of simply rate cuts. Reforms are needed to address the very wide variations in the cost of care that reflect the wide variations in population density and service delivery environments. The need for home care is growing as our nation's population ages, particularly for those with chronic illnesses and multiple chronic illnesses. We know that home health care provides an efficient and high-quality solution. Access to in-home health care keeps people in their community where mobility-restricted family and friends can remain an important support network. For that reason, I ask for your consideration of this amendment, but I'm also prepared to withdraw it at this time.
Legislation by referendum. Worse.
We'll recognize Mr. Ross now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk want to read the amendment and pass out the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3200 offered by Mr. Ross of Arkansas. Add at the end of
Ask unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read. Mr. Ross is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this markup as we work toward passing a health care reform that lowers cost and improves quality of care. It makes access available to so many while passing health insurance reform. Today I'm offering an amendment that I will hesitantly withdraw, which I feel improves the quality of care for Medicare beneficiaries with hearing loss and balance disorders. Approximately 31 million Americans experience some degree of hearing loss, and that number is expected to increase to 78 million by 2030. In addition, hearing impairment is one of the most common conditions affecting older adults, with approximately 33% of Americans age 60 and over and 40 to 50% of those age 75 and older with hearing loss. Currently, Medicare requires that beneficiaries with hearing loss or balance disorders obtain a physician referral before seeing an audiologist. This amendment will allow Medicare beneficiaries the option of going directly to a qualified audiologist, just as they are allowed access to a range of non-physician practitioners, including podiatrists, optometrists, chiropractors, clinical psychologists, and physician assistants. Furthermore, this amendment would give consumers choice without diminishing the important role of medical doctors or expanding the scope of practice for audiology. In addition to providing comparable coverage of many private health plans, this amendment would also bring Medicare in line with the policies of other federal health programs, such as the Federal Employee Health Benefits Program and Department of Veterans Affairs. In fact, the VA, Veterans Administration, allowed veterans to directly access audiologists since 1992, and it is reported that the policy provides, quote, high-quality, efficient, and cost-effective hearing care. I am withdrawing this amendment only because of a potential cost issue that has been raised by the CBO. However, I have many questions on how CBO arrived at their projections. Therefore, I ask the Chairman for his support and commitment in working with me and CBO to answer such questions. I also ask the Chairman for his support in revisiting this important legislation in the future so that we can work towards improving access to hearing care for Medicare beneficiaries.
The gentleman, we're willing to work with you on it. My understanding is that you're going to withdraw it, and we'll certainly work with you on it. Has the gentleman withdrawn his amendment?
Appreciate the Chairman's commitment to work with us on the CBO scoring issues as well as how we can advance this legislation in the not-too-distant future. And with that, I will withdraw this amendment.
I thank the gentleman. Let me just be sure that the gentleman from Iowa, have you agreed to withdraw your amendment? I wanted to be sure of that. Mr. Braley?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that was the intent of my remarks, and I was just waiting for an invitation to finalize that withdrawal.
Okay. The gentleman from Iowa's amendment has been withdrawn. Gentleman from New York, Mr. Wiener.
Mr. Chairman, I know that, thank you, Mr. Wiener. I know we've got some votes. I have a colloquy, but I have to go to the House, the conference on the defense bill, so I don't know if I'm going to make it back. May I do the colloquy now, Mr. Wiener? Would that be all right?
Gentleman is recognized for the colloquy.
Do you have the colloquy with?
You can start and I'll find it.
All right. All right, Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word. And I'd like to enter into a colloquy with you regarding amendments that I'd offered during our last markup to H.R. 3200 to protect our veterans, guardsmen, and reservists in the agreements that you and I have reached on these military and veterans amendments. First, regarding my amendment to ensure that the VA coverage is deemed acceptable under H.R. 3200 under Subpart A of the bill, Section 59B relating to the tax on individuals without acceptable health care coverage. It is my understanding that under Section D on page 171, titled, quote, acceptable coverage requirement, end quote, subsection F on page 172 will be changed to include a period after, quote, the United States Code, end quote, on line 23, and the rest of the paragraph will be struck. With this change, the language will read, quote, coverage under the Veterans Health Care Program under Chapter 17 of Title 38 of the United States Code, period, end quote. And with this change, veterans enrolled in the VA health care system will be deemed to have acceptable health care coverage for the purposes of individual coverage mandate and will not be subject to the 2.5% tax. According to this letter I received last night from yourself, Chairman Miller of the Ed and Labor Committee and Chairman Rangel of Ways and Means Committee, the three chairmen are committed to ensuring that the veterans will have met their obligations for obtaining health insurance under the tax code and not be subject to the 2.5% tax consequence. Two questions. Will the exact changes that I just outlined to Section 59B of H.R. 3200 be made with this commitment? And secondly, when can we expect to see those changes?
The three chairmen commit to, Chairman Filner, you and all veterans, that enrollment in VA health care will meet the commitments under this bill to have health insurance by making the specific language changes you cited.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secondly, I appreciate the addition of my amendment to your base text of the substitute amendment to ensure that the public option created under 3200 reimburses the VA for treatment of non-service connected conditions. This provision ensures that the public plan is on the same playing field as private plans in reimbursing the VA for non-service connected care provided by the VA, and I thank you for making this important change to H.R. 3200. Third, I understand that you are working with Chairman Rangel on clarifying the existing de minimis language to take into consideration Guard and reservists that are called to active duty and those returning from active duty. While it is our hope that the transition is fluid for these service members, and so that they are never without health insurance, we must ensure that they are protected from the individual mandate tax should they, for reasons beyond their control, be temporarily without health insurance due to the process of enrolling them into and out of TRICARE. Mr. Waxman?
Yes, I agree that a smooth transition is important, and I commit to working with Chairman Rangel to see what we can do in reference such individuals return from active duty as a part of what the Secretary of the Treasury considers when developing the de minimis rules.
And fourth, Mr. Waxman, I understand your concerns about the amendment that I'd offered during the markup to protect employers of Guard and reservists, and I agree with you that the Guard and reservists must have the option to continue with their employer-provided care, especially when their families are concerned. I also agree with you that our Guard and reservists should be given the choice to stay with their employer-provided health insurance or enter into TRICARE, and that decision should be left solely to them and their families. However, it is important that we also consider that the employers of our Guard and reservists and ensure that we do not in any way provide disincentives for employers to hire Guard and reservists. One notable disincentive is the 8% employer penalty tax for not providing health insurance to their employees. Can you please explain the intent of H.R. 3200 on the obligation of employers to offer or provide health insurance to their employees?
Individuals and families are dealing with numerous changes in their lives as a member goes off to defend this country in a war. It's important that we protect their ability to choose, particularly for families, employer-sponsored insurance for continuity of care purposes. Employers, like they do for other employees, are required to not discontinue their offering of health insurance to the individual or their family while the employee is fighting in a war. The obligations are no different than what is required for other employees.
And finally, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for accepting two of the amendments that offered in the last markup, H.R. 3200, which will allow veterans, service members, and their families to choose to carry additional health insurance other than that provided by the VA and TRICARE, and to access the health exchange created under H.R. 3200. My other amendment preserves the authorities of the VA and DoD to ensure that veterans and the defense secretaries retain their decision-making authority for their respective health care systems, and their authorities will never be challenged or obstructed by the HHS Secretary or the Health Commissioner created under H.R. 3200. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank Joe Barton, Cliff Stearns, and extend special thanks and appreciation to Nathan Deal, my fellow Army JAG, for his strong effort and support of military and veterans. And, Mr. Chairman, you listened to the concerns of the Veterans Service Organizations, in particular the American Legion, AMVETS, Disabled Veterans of America, Veterans of Foreign Wars, Vietnam Veterans of America, Blind Veterans Association, the Jewish War Veterans of the United States, Military Order of the Purple Heart, and the Wounded Warrior Project. They had expressed their grave concerns, and you have addressed them, and I extend my appreciation to you, Mr. Chairman, for meeting your obligations to work with me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boyer. Mr. Weiner, you have an amendment.
I do.
Let me just inform members that we have a vote pending, and so Mr. Weiner will now discuss his amendment, and we will not come to a vote on it. Then we'll return after the votes on the House floor because we will have a roll call vote on the final passage of this bill. Mr. Weiner.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as we all know, Medicare bans reimbursement to physicians for certain health care benefits, health care services in which they have a financial interest. Essentially, we bar people from referring to themselves for obvious reasons. There's a conflict of interest inherent in that relationship, one that doesn't protect necessarily patients nor taxpayers. There is an exception that was written into the so-called Stark rules for in-house ancillary services that would reimburse for CAT scans and MRIs and PET scans. And the reason for that was we wanted to have some basic level of diagnostic be able to be accessible at doctors' offices. The Braley-Weiner amendment would end that practice because that small gap has now turned into a giant truck-sized, very expensive loophole through which billions of dollars each year are driving. That's not me saying that. The Blue Cross and Blue Shield recently said that 30% of all imaging procedures that are done by non-radiologists are unnecessary, meaning doctors who have an image machine in their office are using it 30% more than they should. Medicare spending on image performance by self-referring physicians have risen dramatically. We went from 58% in 2000 to 64% according to GAO. American College of Radiology estimates the cost of unnecessary imaging resulting from self-referrals is about $16 billion a year. The Washington Post recently did a story where they looked at one practice on the Iowa-Illinois border where they found that urologists in that practice did 35 scans in October, 41 in November, 55 in December of 2005, and then it went up 700% the month that they purchased their own CT scanner that they had to go ahead and pay for. It's intuitive that if you believe that this conflict of interest shouldn't exist, it's intuitive that it's being abused, and the evidence bears it out. The evidence bears out something else. It's dangerous. The amount of radiology, the amount of radiation that is being pumped into people by these unnecessary and expensive exams are causing real health problems. A study was done that's showing that 1% of all cancers are just radiation from medical imaging that is completely unnecessary. The Braley-Weiner amendment would ban the reimbursement for these self-referrals, will save a lot of money, will protect physicians, will protect patients, and we will also make sure that these types of things are not done necessarily. And I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Iowa.
Before you yield to him, I just want to inform members that there's three and a half minutes left on the vote on the House floor. So we'll have a transcript of Mr. Braley's comments if you're not here to hear them directly. Mr. Braley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The primary focus of this amendment is on two very important priorities: reducing cost and improving patient safety. Every medical economist will tell you that the problem of overutilization is a big driver of healthcare costs, and that nowhere is that area more important than in high-end diagnostic imaging services. And one of the things that we're trying to do with this amendment is to try to focus sharply on the contributing factors and address them in a way that is meaningful. And I think my colleague has laid out some of those important priorities. But one of the things that he didn't mention is that the serious issue of patient safety is often overlooked because, according to studies that have been done, when non-radiologists conduct imaging scans, these deficiencies in safeguarding patient safety and the quality of the images themselves are 10 times more likely to occur. We're seeing an enormous impact in terms of cancer studies that are related to radiation, and that's one of the reasons why it's important to get a handle on this. And I am proud to join with my colleague in introducing this amendment. I yield back the time.
Well, thank you. And before I yield back the time, you know, look, the argument against this is basically from doctors who said we bought expensive machines, we got to pay them off now. I understand. I feel bad about that. Maybe we can structure this in some way to allow them to phase it in. I don't want to, you know, I know people have bills to pay. But that can't be what animates this debate. Too much of the waste that we have in the system are people saying, I need to do these things that are inefficient because I need to pay my bills. I think that that is not the way we should be making these decisions. And if we fail to pass this amendment, CMS has the right, and they should require a doctor that orders a test to report such tests to CMS. They should have to use their own NPI. They should have to report to Congress whether these growth trends are reversed, and they should have to disclose their ownership in any at all diagnostics. And with that, I urge a yes vote.
Gentlemen,
would the chairman like to withdraw this in interest of the fact that the room is empty at this point?
did you plan to ask for a vote on this amendment?
I plan to be as pliant to the chairman's wishes as I could, given the time.
Okay, we will recess now, respond to the votes on the House floor, and I would urge all the members to return as quickly as possible.
There you go.
And then we will have the rest of the business and go pretty quickly to a roll call vote.
No. If the chairman, I was under the impression the chairman was going to kindly offer that if I withdraw it, we'd work on solving some of these problems.
I think that's a very good idea. I would urge you to do that because you've made a very strong
Given
case.
the full-throated and vociferous argument the gentleman has made for withdrawing it, I would be glad to accept your kind offer to continue to work on this issue further, and I withdraw the amendment.
The amendment is withdrawn. We'll now recess until after the last vote.
that we can put in the record, and then if we need to make the conforming changes.
Meeting will please come back to order. I ask unanimous consent that the text of a colloquy between myself and Mr. Markey on community health centers, and secondly, a colloquy between myself, Mr. Sarbanes, and Mr. Dingle on Mr. Sarbanes' school-based health center amendment be made part of the record. Hearing no objection, that will be the order. And I ask unanimous consent that staff be allowed to make technical and conforming changes to the motion as amended. Ms. DeGette.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'd like to engage the chairman in a colloquy, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I know that reauthorizing the Title VII health workforce programs, including primary care workforce training, dental workforce training, workforce diversity, and student loan repayments have been for a long time a concern of this committee. And we've done a great deal to make improvements to some of these programs under this bill. I simply would like to encourage you and the rest of the committee to address the Title VII programs that still require reauthorization outside of this health reform legislation, and ask that we make an effort to move these issues forward when the subcommittee schedule offers an opportunity to do so.
Would the gentlelady yield?
I'd be happy to yield to the chairman of the subcommittee.
I just want to thank the Congresswoman for raising this issue and for working with me on the provisions reflected in this bill. As you know, we've targeted our focus on primary care and nursing workforce to ensure that we're able to facilitate access to the primary care services that all Americans need. The recent Salmonella and H1N1 outbreaks demonstrated how strategic investments in the public health workforce are necessary to ensure we're well equipped for public health emergencies. And the bill also takes steps to make certain the health workforce is prepared to serve America's health needs in the 21st century. Of course, there are other areas in Title VII that I and many members have interest in addressing, and I know we need to make sure that many of these programs are improved and, where appropriate, reauthorized. So I've agreed to consider Title VII programs this Congress and the subcommittee, and I look forward to working with the gentlewoman from Colorado throughout the process.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate you sharing these concerns, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. Ms. Sutton?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman, and I would like to engage in a colloquy, Chairman Waxman, if we could. Okay, thank you very much. I want to thank you for your tireless work on health care reform, and I know that we share the common goal of making quality, affordable health care available for all Americans. And one thing is certain, that as part of health care reform, we must demand accountability from our health insurers. Currently, insurance companies are reaping windfall profits by taking in ever-increasing premiums and failing to use those premiums for claims. The premiums continue to skyrocket, but consumers don't receive additional benefits or care. Medical loss ratio is used to calculate the amount an insurance company pays out in claims and medical services versus what it spends on administration and keeps as profit. In the discussion draft of H.R. 3200, a medical loss ratio was created to make sure that insurers will be paying 85% of their collected premiums out in medical costs. Unfortunately, that 85% figure was taken out of H.R. 3200 as introduced in the legislation that was passed out of this committee. We're currently working with the CBO to create language that will hold all plans at the 85% level without raising the cost to our legislation. And I hope that the chairman will work with me and Representative Schakowsky to restore this 85% medical loss ratio figure as a necessary first step in ending insurance company abuse. I'd also like to add that our colleagues in the Education and Labor Committee placed the 85% figure back into the bill through their committee's amendment process. And my question is, will the chairman commit to adding the 85% figure back into our legislation in the Rules Committee when we work out the language and definitions?
I thank the gentlewoman from Ohio for her attention to this issue, and I want to work this through with you as we go to the Rules Committee when that language is worked out. I'd also note that Mr. Stupak and I, through the Oversight Subcommittee, have asked the nation's largest insurers for information on their current loss ratios, and that information will be forthcoming to help inform the Congress and the public about this important issue. Do you wish to yield back the balance of your time?
I thank the chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Capps?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I want to briefly discuss an amendment that would allow certain cancer hospitals access to prescription drugs at the low prices offered under the 340B program in our bill. I'm not offering it in committee today, but I do hope to see this amendment in your legislation as it moves to the House floor. This amendment would simply add PPS-exempt cancer hospitals to the list of entities that may apply for the 340B program. As you know, these hospitals serve a unique population that is more afflicted with illness than average. These hospitals also incur additional costs in developing and disseminating cutting-edge cancer treatments. H.R. 3200 already expands access to 340B to other PPS-exempt facilities, including children's hospitals, critical access hospitals, Medicare-dependent hospitals, sole community hospitals, and rural referral centers. So I'd like to note that this amendment was also approved unanimously in the Senate Help Committee in July when they marked their bill up.
Would the gentlelady yield to me?
Of course.
I want to thank you for your work on this amendment. It would allow certain cancer hospitals access to prescription drugs at the low prices offered under HRSA's 340B program. This amendment would reduce costs for these expensive treatments for the benefit of the uninsured patient treated by these facilities. It's consistent with the overall goal of the 340B program, which is to enable safety net health care providers to purchase prescription drugs at significantly reduced prices.
Thank you, Chairman Waxman. I hope I can count on your support.
Well, I do support this amendment. We'll continue to work with you and work with the Rules Committee to make sure that it is included in the legislation as it moves forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate your help in enacting this policy into law, and we'll continue to work with you as the legislation moves forward, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The question is now on the Waxman substitute amendment.
Mr. Chairman?
Who seeks recognition?
I wonder if you might yield to me for a question for just a moment in regards to the amendment that Ms. Sutton offered and withdrew.
Yes.
And you referenced some information that you had requested from insurance companies, and I believe this was the information that was requested over the summer while we were on recess. Will that information be shared with the minority at some point?
I believe it will be.
When could we expect to look at that?
Well, I don't have an answer for you, but we'll be in touch with you and Mr. Barton when we have more information. The question is now on the Waxman substitute amendment to the motion as amended. All those in favor of this Waxman substitute as amended will say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The question is now on the motion by Mr. Dingell as amended, and we'll proceed to a roll call vote.
Mr. Waxman.
Aye.
Mr. Waxman, aye. Mr. Dingell. Mr. Dingell, aye. Mr. Markey. Mr. Boucher. Mr. Pallone. Mr. Pallone, aye. Mr. Gordon. Mr. Gordon, aye. Mr. Rush. Ms. Eshoo. Ms. Eshoo, aye. Mr. Stupak. Mr. Stupak, aye. Mr. Engel. Mr. Green. Ms. Degat. Ms. Degat, aye. Mrs. Capps. Mrs. Capps. Aye. Mr. Doyle. Ms. Harmon. Ms. Harmon, aye. Ms. Schakowsky. Ms. Schakowsky, aye. Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Gonzalez, aye. Mr. Inslee. Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin, aye. Mr. Ross. Mr. Weiner. Mr. Weiner, aye. Mr. Matheson. Mr. Butterfield. Mr. Butterfield, aye. Mr. Melanson. Mr. Melanson, no. Mr. Barrow. Mr. Barrow, aye. Mr. Hill. Mr. Hill votes aye. Ms. Matsui. Ms. Matsui, aye. Mrs. Christensen. Mrs. Christensen, aye. Ms. Castor. Ms. Castor votes aye. Mr. Sarbanes. Mr. Sarbanes, aye. Mr. Murphy of Connecticut. Mr. Murphy, aye. Mr. Space. Mr. Space, aye. Mr. McNerney. Ms. Sutton. Ms. Sutton, aye. Mr. Braley. Mr. Welch. Mr. Barton. Mr. Barton, no. Mr. Hall. Mr. Hall, no. Mr. Upton. Mr. Upton, no. Mr. Stearns. Mr. Stearns, no. Mr. Deal. Mr. Deal votes no. Mr. Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield, no. Mr. Shimkus. Mr. Shimkus, no. Mr. Shadig. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Boyer. Mr. Radonovich. Mr. Radonovich, no. Mr. Pitts. Mr. Pitts, no. Ms. Bonomack. Ms. Bonomack, no. Mr. Walden. Mr. Walden, no. Mr. Terry. Mr. Terry, no. Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, no. Mrs. Myrick. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, no. Mr. Murphy, Pennsylvania. Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Ms. Blackburn. Ms. Blackburn, no. Mr. Gingrey. Mr. Scalise. Mr. Scalise votes no. Mr. Boucher. Mr. Boucher, aye.
Mr. Engel.
Mr. Markey. Mr. Markey votes aye.
Mr. Engel is.
Mr. Engel. Mr. Engel votes aye. Mrs. Myrick votes no. Mrs. Myrick, no.
Are there any other members who wish to be recorded?
Mr. Matheson. Pass.
Mr. Chairman, we have one more member who's imminently on his way. Mr. Shadig. There he is. You haven't been recorded.
Mr. Shadig, no. Mr. McNerney is coming in.
Mr. McNerney has not been recorded.
Mr. McNerney. Mr. McNerney votes aye. Okay. Mr. Matheson. Mr. Matheson votes no.
Clerk will report the vote.
On that vote, Mr. Chairman, the ayes were 27 and the nays were 20.
Can we interrupt for
not recorded, Mr.
Gentleman
Chairman.
from Illinois?
Mr. Rush? Mr. Rush votes aye.
Any other member who Wishes to be recorded. Clerk will report the vote.
On that vote, Mr. Chairman, the ayes were 28 and the nays were 22.
Thank you. So the motion by Mr. Dingell as amended is agreed to. I want to thank everyone today for all your cooperation on this motion.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Before we adjourn, I'd like an inquiry about pending business on the floor tomorrow that is jurisdictional of this committee, if I could be recognized for that.
Sure.
I have just been informed that there's going to be a special session of the Rules Committee this evening at which it will be recommended by the Speaker that a special rule be passed that allows a bill to come to the floor tomorrow dealing with the Medicare Part D premium, which under current law is scheduled to rise, I believe, by 2.9% or something like that order of magnitude. That is, I am also told that this is an issue that would be within the jurisdiction of this committee if we were going according to regular order. So I would inquire of the chair what the chair knows about this and what, if any, impact this committee has had on that, and why we didn't have a hearing and a markup of this bill.
My understanding, Mr. Barton, is that it's an emergency matter because the premium actually goes up at the beginning of the fiscal year, which would be next Wednesday, I guess, or Thursday. And so that if we don't act on it on an emergency basis tomorrow, that premium would go into effect. So that's the reason for acting on an emergency basis tomorrow.
Well, why couldn't we have held a hearing on this and marked the bill up in the month that we've been back since the August, or the 3 weeks? I mean, isn't it a little demeaning to the committee that this thing comes up and with apparently absolutely no input from anybody on either side of this committee?
I think the problem stems from the COLA. In other words, we were not aware until the actual information came out about, what the COLA would be. And since I guess there was no increase in the COLA, this has an impact on senior citizens' ability to pay the Part B premium. So if there's no COLA increase, now we realize there should not be any Part B premium increase. Well, but that's information that was not available.
Well, the minority we have sympathy for the issue. I mean, but my constituents knew about this in my August town hall meetings. I mean, I was asked about it by my Medicare constituents. It's just stunning to me, Mr. Chairman, that time and time again this committee is treated as cavalierly, and the process is treated cavalierly as it is. There is absolutely no reason, Mr. Chairman, we couldn't have had a hearing in your subcommittee, or if Mr. Waxman chose in full committee, and we couldn't have marked that bill up today.
Well, if the gentleman,
I'd be happy to.
I mean, look, I'm just as much, and I know that Mr. Waxman is just as much an advocate of regular order as you are. I think it's just one of those exigencies now where we're just going to have to deal with it because we don't want to have a negative impact on our constituents. So I don't know that there's anything else to say other than that we feel we have to proceed now because we are up against that October 1st deadline.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate the gentleman's remarks. Again, I want to thank everyone for all your cooperation today in getting this motion passed before 5 o'clock. And without objection, the meeting is adjourned.